we live in the back apartment of a early 18th century courtyard, and it turns out they didn't have a lot of money left over for large glass windows or
surprise.
So you're keeping well.
Indeed, yeah, just about. I think we've dodged a bullet with some of the sort of lockdown social policy pieces, and Denmark has definitely been a beneficiary, I think, of having a sort of not very population dense. I mean, Copenhagen's 500,000 people on a good day. Wow. And of course, everyone's cycling about and generally feeling pretty virtuous and healthy and whatnot. And yeah, so no, on that regard, very good. And my wife, thankfully, her sort of small retail thing is still going and sort of adapted well. I think, we've sort of seen retail has become e-tail with gusto. So yeah, and how about yourself? How's the family?
Yeah, all good. Usual craziness. I mean, the kids have been complete lunatics today. I think just kind of by the end of the week, they're just like, like balls of busy pop that need to explode. And so I've had a bit of that this morning, which is always a joy to contain. Although no calls from the school saying bad things. Actually, calls saying good things, which is quite surprising.
Way.
So maybe they watched a recent podcast.
I was going to say, I don't think we aired that episode yet with the message.
I was bemoaning last week or the week before how they only ever call in lockdown when there's bad news. So, and obviously myself and my wife, we try and be good teachers, but that's not the career we signed up for. So, but we do love our schools and we do love our teachers. So hopefully more good calls, please. So look, Oliver, thanks, and for joining us today. We've got probably 45-50 minutes. The series Found Stars and Fun Stars, I think you're probably quite well versed. It's something Anthony and I set up, or Ant and Chris, as I always comically refer to, and I think people have listened to enough podcasts now to get that corny Chris joke. But the logic. We've delved into our community, the Notwits community, to find wonderful people like you, good self, on the funding side, and similarly on the founding side. And, clearly it's 45-50 minutes, several questions we've got lined up for you. Share your wisdom. You're obviously a very clever man and have had a very successful career at a very young age. So I'm sure there's lots of people who'll be looking to hear and emulate those. Sorry, I think the Waitrose order has just appeared next door, so apologies for that noise. But before we go on, just quickly, why Denmark?
Yeah, sure.
Besides it being the happiest place on earth, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, apart from that, and always in the top 10 quality, like it's really the sort of the Maersk HQ piece, and it was following the opportunity. And then as it unfolded, it sort of all accelerated a bit with sort of COVID and the like. But actually, the idea of remote working, the idea of this sort of satellite office piece really sort of came to life. So follow the opportunity. The earliest stage, of course, the idea of teams being together face to face to try and create a culture, to try and sort of really embed that, was really sort of principle at the starting point of it. But Maersk, of course. Sorry.
So in essence, you're not in Denmark because your wife is Danish. It is a business move. And if you were to tell people a bit more, when we think of Maersk, I think of Southampton University and the docks when I was 30 odd years ago when I used to study at Southampton, and you used to see Maersk written everywhere. And kind of Maersk Ventures. I mean, what's the gig? Are they investing in everything and anything, or is it kind of shipping related?
No, you're quite right. So Maersk definitely known for its iconic blue vessels. It's great, but is port A to port B container freight. Very much sort of front and center of their life. And Maersk Growth was really sort of architected principally to look at sort of adjacent growth opportunities. So as we're all aware, and exactly as you allude to, it's a bit of a sort of industrial giant. In many respects, shipping is a little bit of a dinosaur. There's lots of things that have evolved and innovated, but I think certainly the world has become a lot more interested in supply chain. There's been a huge amount of innovation. And of course, as consumers, you know, we see and sort of touch that weekly with our sort of e-com, our sort of deliveries and so forth. And I think now we're seeing that other people in the value chain, other people in logistics and supply chain in general, are seeing this sort of idea of interconnectivity and, you know, customer-centric view, trying to take a holistic view of the cargo owner. So for Maersk Growth, it's a little bit about using venture capital as a strategic tool, an externally facing strategic tool to sort of engage and work with and co-create with those innovators. You know, as you know, entrepreneurs are fantastic at finding problems and they're fantastic at solving them, or at least having a very good go at it. So part of our role is trying to facilitate that with capital and other support.
Okay, so there is a theme within the business that the companies you're looking for, talking to, I suppose scouting the whole of Europe, maybe the world for, have to have a kind of certain set of parameters. And I suppose for the audience, what would those parameters be? Yeah,
sure. So stage-wise, we're very much early stage. So for us, that's seed and Series A. And geographically, we're probably...
Sorry, can I just ask there, because there's a lot of debate at the moment. I was on a podcast, someone else's podcast this week, and someone asked me, what do you classify as seed and what do you classify as Series A? And I was like, and so you know, I've kind of got a rough idea. I know it's a changing feast as per the survey, but what's your thought process there?
So I think for us, it's better to think about it in terms of our comfort with the early phases of market fit, or even immediately prior to market fit. So where we've got high conviction on a product, on a team, on a particular market opportunity, we're comfortable taking that risk. And then numerically for us, we're looking to invest between $500,000 and $5 million US initially, normally with sort of a sweet spot in the sort of $1.5 to $3 US or equivalent range, a little bit for follow on. And then outside of that 5 million, we're sort of asking for additional permissions, if you like. So for us, early is that it's sort of the largely a framing around product market fit, early revenues. But as you say, it's a movable feast. And with our coverage in Europe and North America, they mean very different things in dollar terms for sure. But that flexibility is definitely there. And then
if I was a founder trying to grab the attention of Oliver, you know, how do I suppose get in your sort of sniper sight? And I suppose with that, you know, if you could give us a flavour of the sort of businesses that you've invested in so far, that would be really good.
Yeah, of course. I mean, really, the pieces where we overlap with any angel or venture capitalist is sort of on the founder and the team. You know, a really backable person with good vision, ambition, and giving people through conversation and through evidence a sense of their ability to problem solve and to sort of do that in increasing scale. So I think, you know, references and networks and pieces are always helpful, which is probably thus it ever was. And I think concretely in terms of the commercial pieces, we try to position ourselves as basically a supply chain investor. So we're conscious that people can come from other industries and look at existing problems with a new lens, and we're really interested in that. And otherwise sort of thinking about the world in very much a sort of swing for the fences mentality. We want people who want to try and build genuinely big businesses. And I keep borrowing someone else's phrase, which I think is fantastic, which is sort of overcoming for the UK sometimes vicarage and supercar syndrome, which is as soon as the business is big enough to sell and you can own a vicarage in the Cotswolds and have a supercar on the drive, they want to sort of cash out. We're really interested in regional businesses, big businesses growing in that way. And I think the nature of that ambition is actually, it speaks to it perfectly with a couple of the UK businesses we've backed have done really well. So one of those is Zigzag, a return logistics platform. Great industry expert at the helm, assembled a really good team around him in terms of operations, sales and so forth. A great investor in circularity capital as well, so sort of look at this from a circular economy lens. And then the nature of the product and their process for quite a small, quite a young business, the capability to serve at the enterprise level, to serve internationally is phenomenal, and it's a great sort of story for technology. And then separately, I think Hubu is a great example. So that was sort of our second sort of big deal in the UK, if you like. We came in quite early a little bit after episode 1 with a sort of post-seed, and then followed enthusiastically at the A, speaking to ecom fulfillment. So just a really, really compelling founder vision, some real operational innovation, using technology to knit the whole thing together. And then, of course, we're able to sort of stand behind that market opportunity. Really big, really big sort of something. And of course, the trend of ecom, during 2020 and beyond, that acceleration has been very helpful in that.
I think another interesting aspect, and I was wondering if you kind of talk to some of the dynamics that you find Maersk Ventures kind of playing in the venture industry, because it's a niche, a huge niche, but a niche nonetheless. Do you find that you have to often lead the rounds because people rely on the expertise, or kind of talk us through some of those aspects?
Yeah, of course. We're definitely structured so that we can lead or follow, and we're equally comfortable with that. I think we recognise we've tried to be architected like a conventional venture capital unit, but also at the same, we recognise that we're not that. There are some amazing, credible, long-term participants in that space. So we sort of love to think of ourselves as a co-investor, an amplifier of capital, I think, more than anything. And to that end, I think people recognise we bring something differentiated to the party, and that's founders and co-investors alike. So founders will often have a chuckle and say, it's nice to talk about these incredibly granular KPIs that no one else even references, pick rates and stuff like that. We can put I can put people to sleep for a living talking about digital container shipping. So there you go. But at the same time, that means we can be a valuable asset alongside. Doesn't always have to manifest in a lead role. And I think for all of the things that we get excited about and the credit that we give to our team and the people we work with, CVC has a complicated history, and it's not always, sort of champagne and gold medals all round. So I think it's just important to be honest with ourselves, that, it's especially in the early phases, I think more heads around the table and a balance of sort of investor authority and input is really sensible.
And does an investment from Maersk usually also include a pilot program or a commercial contract as well as part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the
that's for anybody listening and can't see the video. That's Chris
podcast
announcing to stay out of the room.
By that warning every occasionally, even though they've been warned not to interrupt me for the next couple of hours, they decide to interrupt.
A friend of mine came up with a genius solution for that, which is after the second knock on the door, the child has to come in the room but stay with you for the duration of the session. They never come in again.
You wouldn't want to witness that. I apologise in advance, but I am a good father. Sorry, I interrupted you there, Oliver. Carry on.
So yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we're most proud of, and one of the sort of strongest and most effective parts of the vision of the sort of founders of Maersk Growth, if you like, was the non-financial value add piece. So essentially the gift from Maersk, if you like, is what we call our value creation team. And those are people with a profile principally from sort of a product management, consulting type skill set. So people who understand early stage business, who understand a bit of corporate development, and effectively become sort of for an entrepreneur, for a young business, the sort of Sherpa within growth, which is a little, within Maersk, which can be a bit sort of labyrinthine at the best of times. And more concretely, that value add, that support is structured in a way that makes sense for an early stage business. So it's all well and good, a large corporate saying, we want to hoover up this value, thanks very much. But rather, we've thought about the world very much as a two-way street of value. So tip of the cap, whoever came up to it, but we have our A through E. So our assets, branding, customers, data, and expertise. And
nice.
Thankfully, there's no sort of copyright retainer on that, I think. But,
so can I drill into that a bit more? So the businesses that you're investing in, ideally would potentially work with alongside Maersk. Maersk would become their customer. Exit to Maersk. What's the sort of end game here, so to speak?
Yeah, there's a bit of a menu of options, if you like. So we actually go to some length at the start of conversations to say we're not architected as a pre-M&A unit. So it's not a given. It's not an intended outcome. We don't want to put a ceiling on value, if you like, artificially. or sort of replicate some of the challenges of CVC of old. But obviously, if Maersk is involved in an arm's length process at a time, then we sort of see that as a win for everyone. And the journey, around that point can also be sort of product co-development. So that's quite a nice one, that we're actually essentially sort of funding and co-developing that with a lot of, sort of quote unquote free resources coming in to sort of support that. Customer introduction, some of the brand equity association. I guess if you zoomed out a bit, you could say that fundamentally Maersk really wants to see continued innovation in the industry. And for Maersk, innovation has often been at things like the vessel and the process level, on the product level. So bigger vessels, more efficient vessels, things like that. And in a way, this is an expression of that we're supporting innovation, digitization in quite a complex, slightly sort of under-innovated industry. And we're,
and I how old is the actual growth Maersk Growth business, Oliver? Is it kind of like started a couple of years ago, or it's been going for 20 years? Largely because of this whole theme that's everyone's clearly drinking the Kool-Aid on at the moment, that COVID accelerating digitization in the world, every industry has to change, and if they don't change they die. Kind of what's the sort of, have you suddenly seen a switch flick on in regards of the innovation piece and because of COVID? I mean, two questions in one, sorry.
Yeah, no, but to actually take it in reverse, I mean, one of the things I always come back to exactly that is trying to sort of diagnose to what extent is it, corporate buzzword hysteria or paranoia, that sort of thing, and to what extent is it a reasonable risk or an opportunity for incumbents in the industry. And one thing I come back to is, a lot of these VC-backed high growth businesses in freight, if you like, in general. So companies like, let's say, Flexport, companies like that. These are companies that sort of 4 or 5 years ago didn't really appear in high level sort of leadership discussions of industry incumbents. And I flicked through a couple of annual reports of big US transport and logistics business, and they appear in the risk register of top 5 competitive threats. And you think, this is a company that, this previously classified its annual spend in technology as a line item halfway through a P&L about IT or IT investment. And now it is absorbing the language, it's recognizing it has challenges, maybe sort of absorbing and retaining the professionals, and it's got genuine competition from VC-backed businesses. So I think in some regard there are niches and segments where things almost overnight have reframed an industry because of technology. I think anything that involves asset operation, of course, you've always got skill and expertise and capability there. And I think maybe the piece that sort of joins those two together is actually remembering who we serve. It's great to think about, let's say, sort of Maersk and what it does, but ultimately, it's our customers who we serve and whose problems we solve. And I think, if you take some of the big global FMCG brands, these are companies that now have very complex questions to pose about how they manage their supply chain, and especially with this connectivity between, let's say, factory and distribution center, and now the end customer as well. So it seems to open the door for early stage technology companies that can address a problem in scale to sort of begin to play in this space.
Have you found that Maersk competitors have also embraced this CVC model as well? And if they do you find that sometimes you end up co-investing with them?
It's a really good question, actually. I think everyone's tackled the challenge of innovation or the opportunity in a different way. I think certainly we've seen some sort of embrace CVC as a bit of a minority sport activity as part of a wider suite of things. And I'm not an industry expert. I come from sort of the early stage investment side, but my sense is that very few have gone into the depth and thought through many of the long-term implications and requirements to do it successfully than others. And I think that's something we've taken great lengths to sort of do, to give it the long-term surety, the footing, and realize, what's really required for this to be a success. In many cases, it tends to be captured internally or by a sort of big bang acquisition, things like that. And then, of course, if you're speaking technology, it's probably quite challenging for companies that are denominated in a certain sort of price earnings, revenue multiple type mentality to look at a technology business, especially a successful M&A one, and sort of digest and get value from that, I think.
So thank you for that. I'm sorry to labour this point, but so the Maersk Growth piece, in essence, you know, because you speak with a lot of experience here, Oliver, you know, it's how long has it been in place?
Yeah, no, you're right. I missed that one. So Maersk Growth as a sort of entity, as a name, was founded in 2016. So it's quite a young initiative. And CVC was essentially one of three pillars which kind of underpins the sort of the logic, the reason to be, the value, if you like, which sort of combines sort of a joint venture piece, an internal innovation piece, and then a more externally facing piece, best handled by sort of CVC, incubator accelerator type activities. So you could say that the CVC activity really began in earnest 2018. So we're sort of 2 and a bit years in. So actually the nice part, we're starting to see the bright spots from the first portfolio, if you like, and then actually that sets the framing for, you know, sort of future activities, if you like. So relatively new sport.
Okay, and then with that in mind, being located in Scandinavia, have you seen a flavour towards local hero type Scandinavian startups and scale-ups, or is there any sort of link? And then second to that, you know, roughly in a given year, you'll make 2, 4, 10 investments. What's the sort of modus operandi?
Yeah, sure. I mean, interestingly enough, it's been very much more a pan-European and a US flavour, I think. And I think that probably speaks to Maersk's sort of sense of self as a global business. So it's at the same time very, very Danish and very, very global. And I think to that end, our sort of appetite on the startup side is, you know, there's a little bit of looking after the ecosystem and, you know, trying to sort of support that in quite a specific way. But with regards to the commercial opportunity, it is following the commercial opportunity, I think. So if we see that ambition, that support, that capability, if it emerges from Sweden, from Denmark, great. We're also seeing it in the hotspots in Germany, in France, even in Spain, certainly in the UK. And then, of course, you know, the US is never short of ambition, I don't think.
Okay, and then, you know, twisting that round the other way, and conversations we've had with a number of VCs this year already, they're starting to see the US appear or be more prominent in some of the funding rounds. I'm just curious as to what you've seen probably in 2020 and well, obviously we're very early in 2021. You know, just, you know, is that happening?
We definitely see that. You know, the US is a fantastic single market. There's a few sort of federal nuances, but it's a fantastic single market and a fantastic hotbed for VC-backed innovation. So there have been some absolutely world-class businesses built in the US. And I think the early beneficiaries of those businesses are now looking at looking at Europe with less of a sort of window shopping approach and much more of a sort of concretized, you know, here is version 2.0. It's maybe more attractively denominated. And certainly, you know, both individual angels, the sort of capabilities at early stage, the talent pools, you know, we're really sort of seeing that recycled into these sort of businesses. So for sure, we see, I think, appearances selectively on cap tables. We see much more engagement and curiosity about the founders, the networks, and the companies. And I think that's really, really, yeah, we definitely recognise it. And almost the second question we wonder is, you know, will this idea of sometimes Europe feels more like a patchwork of countries than, you know, sort of otherwise, but it does feel that something's changed. The experiences of people who've been country managers in the high growth mobility startups, you know, the Ubers, the scooter businesses, some of the delivery giants, you know, taking that capability and ambition and recycle it into these businesses, it seems to also appeal to that American investor base as well. So it feels like it is developing. Yeah, we definitely see that.
Okay. And then I suppose looking at the here and now, 2021, a lot of the people we've talked to, especially Series A level, which, you know, as I was going back to my point earlier, a really successful hot Series A at the moment is a 20 million type pound scenario. You know, kind of, and then seed is 5 million. I mean, just curious, you know, what, are you really busy? Is Maersk rocking and rolling? You kind of like, oh my God, I've got so much business, I can't sleep, I have to do it all now. What's the sort of current temperature?
I think we're really pleased how the portfolio's done. I think we've, you know, let's also be honest, it's a soldier of fortune in that regard, because of course the world suddenly became interested in supply chain, distribution of physical goods, all this stuff, and I think that has fostered larger and more sort of high velocity transactions and interest, and sort of, you know, the next 1, 2, 3 around that. I think we definitely saw that initial slump in 20 and then a bounce back. And not to be too sycophantic, but you called perfectly the drought on seed, and then sort of, you know, flowing through in the delay, the sort of that sort of that, or, you know, the hose pipe ban, if you like, not necessarily that it was enforced so much as self-enforced. I think early this year, early couple of weeks, felt like everyone was still in planning and caution mode, and I have to say the last fortnight or so, we're just seeing absolutely. I mean, we are incredibly busy, and
off to the races.
Yeah. And it's very clear that everyone, from the entrepreneurs and their teams to the co-investors to the people who are potentially going to follow, everyone seems to have essentially adopted organically into a new pattern. This is how we do it remotely. This is the speed and the cadence. This is the sort of engagement we want to get ready for your next phase, or otherwise let's compress that down into a bigger Series A, as you say. But yeah, concentration and competitive for sure for the.
And just with that, you know, I suppose I'm going back to the point of, you know, how do you find these businesses? You know, how does that founder find you? Are you working especially with certain non-corporate venture capitalists that are real kind of groovers and shakers in sort of maybe finding the baby seed type companies to put your way? How's it all work?
Yeah, we very much, and I think that comes to our sort of proportionally more classic VC DNA. We very much try to sort of focus on network. So whether that's actually the co-investors, you know, and there's a little bit of hope, if you like, but sort of hope that they do indeed agree with our thesis that we can be a good co-investor, add value, differentiate, etc. So sort of a little bit of hope and trust there, but exactly that network of earlier stage, you know, sort of seed, pre-seed, early A, trying to be involved. And of course, what we try to do there is to sort of lend our expertise, offer a bit of pro bono, whatever we can do to actually help on a sort of, you know, that basis. And equally, I think we're starting to see, I probably sort of reference that piece, you know, country managers of some of the bigger VC-backed or now IPO'd companies, as they recycle, you know, those entrepreneurs are often getting into select pre-seed opportunities or joining, or so, you know, it's a long way of saying, I think network, and the more professionalized that is, and the more crisp our offering, I think, the better. And then
do you think you're seeing increasing amount of collaboration from different VCs around the world?
I think so. I certainly, I mean, I suppose as ever, it's a little bit binary, really. There are people who probably, you know, sort of get the story, or they've done something with us and they get it and they sort of see how we operate and what we do, or can reference our sort of founders and their networks. And I think that's very much an open door. And I think there are probably others who are skeptical and have a longer view of history and CVC and just sort of think, well, I'd rather not create that capacity, etc., etc. But generally speaking, you know, it really does feel more collaborative than competitive. Yeah.
On that added value piece of you know, the commercial side of it as well, could you talk us through some of the challenges that you have with rolling out some of these pilot programs, and any tips that you would have for entrepreneurs listening that, you know, want to get pilot programs either with Maersk or in general, something that they could take away?
That's an amazing question. It is the primary function of our value creation team to sort of almost, we think about it as matching the wheel speed. You can have lots of good intention on the corporate side, but I think it's really important to focus on what's the critical path for the decision making, who has to say what and when, what's the budget, And I think it's a totally reasonable question for entrepreneurs to do that, and to sort of keep asking that question, keep everyone sharp on it. Because again, corporate, full of good intention, full of really, really excellent people, but the default engagement for most corporates is enterprise grade. And it's really unreasonable to stand a early stage business up to enterprise grade scrutiny. So two things: it's always checking the permissioning, the sort of the T's and C's and the permissioning, the critical paths. And then I think also sort of patience. You know, we invest and we often say, this is day one, this is sort of day 90, this is day 180. And then actually, you know, it might be a 12 to 18 month conversation. And I think to have the patience on both sides to do that, and to sort of get out the entrepreneur's way, you know, there's a lot of you know, goodwill, but we need to make sure it's structured in the right way.
I'm sure that can cause some frustration, because, you know, with the startups, they always have these KPIs that are grow insanely quick and, you know, as big and fast as you can. So is your advice as well, you know, working on pilot programs, but also not devoting all of your resources to those pilot programs because of that timeline, and still working on other commercial things?
Yeah, that's a really, really valid point. I think it's really important for any investor, and certainly any corporate investor in corporate, not to, you know, gum up the gears. It's letting the firm do its job and evolve in its own way. And then, of course, the nice part, you might have this big strategic long-term piece or this project. But then, of course, think about all the smaller tactical pieces that your investors, your partners, your corporate partners can support. You know, we certainly have big projects ongoing with our portfolio, but in smaller tactical ways, we can bring out our head of e-procurement, our Brexit sort of war room team, and, you know, customs. There's all manner of pieces. We can do small tactical things to sort of come in, support a company, give it some insight for free, and not sort of derail the business. But it's a really good point.
Looking at the human, I suppose, interface of when you've been pitched to by founders, I think we had someone on recently who said they were talking about market size, and the founder replied, "Oh, just go Google it," because he didn't know the particular answer. It just kind of like, what's your sort of avoid this banana skin when you come and meet me in Copenhagen? Where have you seen people really press that self-destruction button in a meeting with you?
It's probably a version of the same mentality with that. I think it's the we have no competition, because in some cases do nothing is competition. In some cases there's sort of a jobs to be done. You know, many incumbent things. You know, people say this industry is built on spreadsheets and you know, telephone calls, and for many small businesses that might be perfectly fine right now. So I think the idea of really knowing your competition from a sort of jobs to be done, that kind of framework, is a really good one. Just think what are people doing, what functions are they hiring, what softwares are they using to be your competitor. You're right, there's almost certainly no one exactly like you, so they're sort of telling the truth. But I think it's a much healthier and more sort of mature market view to say, this is what we're up against. In the case it's an existing function.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's my number one pet peeve when being pitched is we have no competition, right?
Yeah, and I think with my, you know, sort of insight here, you know, I think that also comes sometimes with somewhat of an arrogant attitude by some founders, and
naivete as well, I feel.
Pardon?
Naivete as well.
Yeah, naivety.
Potato.
Whichever way you say it, I don't know.
Potato.
English way. But that's why I went pardon. No, it's kind of interesting that, you know, we do come across quite a few founders, and we, you know, I'm of a elder position, so I've kind of been around and seen it a bit, and it's kind of I do sort of wince sometimes when you know, I'm kind of have some of these various founders, not all. We work with the very best ones, but it's that pinch of like, look, you know, having that respect for a fund or an individual is kind of key, I think, to building human relationships. And I really turns me off when I meet founders who are just like arrogant with me, and I'm sure it does with you, Oliver. So anyhow, Chris is going off on one. So I'm drawing it back into Maersk Ventures, and you know, with great tips for founders. Lots of people are really interested in VC, corporate VC. If I was that sort of budding grad, or not even a grad, someone who's you know, unemployment's potentially going to be rife everywhere around the world in the next year or two. How do I suddenly like get my CV in front of a corporate VC, and what's the real job like? What do you love about the job?
So I think maybe to sort of take it in reverse, if that's all right. I mean, for me, it's the founders and the ecosystem. I think what an absolute pleasure to get to work with entrepreneurs. I mean, who are, you know, entrepreneurs are the rock stars of the economy. Of the VCs get to bask in their reflective glory from time to time. and I think the point to highlight, maybe to work closely to the sort of those looking to get in the industry, is it's from time to time. And actually, you know, a huge proportion of the job is, you know, lots of sort of burnt out shoe leather, lots of conversations which probably don't have, you know, a fruitful complementarity right then, and they might have in future. But of course, it's coming back to that piece on ecosystem as well. You know, there's people that we've known for a number of years that we've sadly still not yet done a deal with, but, you know, you pick up the phone to them as soon as you can, you enjoy the chat, you exchange information, do what you can to help, and you sort of hope you get there as well. So I think from that perspective, it's someone who's, you know, curious, interested, and really sort of gets a thrill out of those kind of people, the sort of weird and wonderful people who are actually out there taking the risks and see it as a privilege to be able to work with and support those people. And who also recognise that a vast proportion of the job is a bit of a grind otherwise. You know, there is a lot of channel checks, understanding market sizing and interrogating models and all these sort of pieces. But I think network's very valuable. And I think to make that connection, those sort of two are linked. So I think there has to be a bit of patience in the network building. It's a little bit less transactional than your sort of corporate, you know, get the CEO or whatever. I think it's always great to have a warm referral, that sort of thing. And I know that's a little bit of an easy get out. So sort of practically to take things forward, one thing that always surprises me that people sort of don't do is, of course, the greatest experience for VC is probably being in the trenches in a VC-backed company, doing anything really, just sort of being there, seeing it, seeing the kind of people, the language, how it operates, how people think about problem solutions. I think CVC is a great route into a particular industry, a particular market. It has a lot more of typically a sort of corporate hiring process that can be easier to navigate. And I think as a general introduction to the VC world, any exposure to portfolio companies, to VC-backed companies, will get you closer to that ecosystem, that network, and a sense of how VCs in general make decisions and think about stuff. Was
that your route, Oliver, or I don't know if we covered that bit actually?
No, it was a little bit sort of varied really. I started off in banking, specifically on sort of the hedge fund side, so the hedge fund services at prime brokerage. So I got to work with those fantastic people for a number of years, and it's just a really amazing market. I mean, some amazing characters. Chris, I'm sure I recall a meeting of mine on one or two choice names from that sector over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. For another day, perhaps. Perhaps we have a beer and
off camera.
And I think that really just started a directionality of wanting to get closer to direct investments, and it was really through family. I've always been exposed to small businesses, and however tough and distinctly unglamorous it is, there is an amazing reward of working in sort of early stage businesses and small businesses. And through that, there was sort of a couple of steps, but basically getting into direct investing. And it was a little bit of a sort of niche, unusual fund, an early stage fund affiliated with Cass Business School, backed by Peter Cullum, who's a phenomenal entrepreneur, built two fantastic businesses amongst other things, and just has an amazing view on entrepreneurship in general and some really insightful things to say. So I got to sort of report to him. I got to report to Andrew Sibbald of Evercore, and I got to sort of effectively be sort of coached and mentored a bit by Nick Badman from sort of 3i and the Angel Co-Fund. And you know, I think between that it says a lot about network and coaching and so forth. And then that was really a jumping off point. So that gave me I guess a sort of a foot in the door, if you like. And then I think from there it's sort of other conversations and other routes into new funds and networks and so forth.
Okay, great. I mean, I'm quite curious because I love Denmark. I'm changing tack a bit here. I haven't been there for a while actually, probably 3 or 4 years. Just kind of, the Danish tech scene. Obviously, I think the company I know very well is To-Do, which is like the Instagram of tattoos. For anyone who likes tattoos, you're going to go on To-Do, and the founder's a fantastic guy. And I think Daniel Lager was one of, he's one of those celebrity footballer type investors in the business, and obviously he has a lot of tattoos as well. So, and also he's Danish, so it kind of fits the bill perfectly. So, kind of what's going on there? I mean, because clearly we're all like, there's hardly any events or, or accelerator demo day parties, or, everyone's tried to shift onto webinars, which, to be perfectly honest, are a bit of a disaster in most cases.
And Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, which
webinars and Clubhouse.
kind of a weird kind of experience where, I've had a bit of a delve into and kind of been approached by some really odd people. Kind of, I don't know why they're attracted to me. So we're kind of obviously, I think, yearning for the return of that physical room events, but curated content, which Notwix is very good at. But I'm just curious, like going back to Denmark, what's happening? Is the scene still live and kicking and growing fast?
I mean, coming as an expat, it's been a little bit learning the ropes a bit and sort of understanding a little bit on sort of the who's who. I mean, certainly there's some amazing success stories, some marquees, which are causing a little bit of that early sort of effect.
I know one, Vivino, who raised a load of money this week, who are a fantastic company that I had the pleasure of meeting a few years back. And yes, so exactly that.
And it does create a bit of a buzz. And being a small city, being a small nation, population wise, you're sort of actually quite close to it personally. So it's not hard. That sort of degrees of separation pieces, and actually these stories are getting a little bit closer to home for a lot more people. So it's becoming, I think, more of a credible path, a credible conversation for young people taking the early steps in that. And with the VC funding, of course, it creates the depth, both sort of the kind of early compensation piece, but also actually the surety and the learning that they're looking for. I think, there's for sure it seems to over-index on sort of 2 or 3 areas, I'd say. You've got the sort of social media, new media type. I think there's a fantastic sort of track around decarbonisation, sustainability. And part of that is, of course, there's some great sort of corporates doing pieces in that, which actually there's, again, a lot of intellectual property and talent. And when that meets, venture capital, exciting things can happen. And of course, from the early days, Danish businesses are sort of transacting in English and thinking globally. It's a small home market. So from day one, they're thinking, pan-Nordics, pan-Scandinavia, pan-European, pan-US, if they want to build something large. So, yeah, I mean, I think probably the final add-on to that is we're sort of, I think, probably the last 6 months increasingly aware of sort of early stage entities, the sort of business accelerator, incubator type, actually thinking about a discrete Danish sort of chapter setup. And I think that would be quite a positive thing as well, just to say, absolutely, let's try and build a cluster around sort of social media derivations or e-com derivations or a bit of both. But yeah, for sure. And there's some really interesting people doing that. Maybe a final bit. We're also seeing a lot of, with the US success stories, a lot of Danish expats coming back. And of course, they have the experience. They have.
Is it Zendesk? Is one of those?
Yeah, and even because I think Danes travel exceptionally well. You've just got very talented people who've been, senior marketing and senior sort of engineers. And
I think it's an important factor when looking at a maturing entrepreneur market and ecosystem. Is multi-time founders, successful exits, that they have the experience, they're coming back, they're taking leadership roles, educating others. It really makes a huge difference.
That, I think, the educate and inspire point, I think it's really helpful. They've been there, they can share the learning, they don't have to do it on someone else's nickel, and to sort of paint a vision of, this is what success can look like, this is what good can look like. And it's yeah, it's great.
And they've had a number of unicorns, haven't they? So you know,
Yes.
that's always good quality stamp. And I mean, just curiously, is when you talk about, you know, Denmark as a whole focusing more on these tech success stories, are they on the news? Are they on like the news at 10 or whatever? Or are they that big or not really?
That's a good point. If my language was there, I'd give you a credible answer, but I'll dodge the question entirely. Because we're sort of in the ecosystem a little bit. I think everyone's very keenly aware of the brand names for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know, you know, what Deliveroo is probably going to IPO soon, and I wouldn't have. I'd love to see it make the news at 10, but it's probably not going to. But it's big news in our lives, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose then, like, just we're coming to near the end of our chat, and it's been really good to catch up. You know, outside of Maersk Growth, what keeps Oliver busy?
Any excuse to be active and outside, and not just because of the COVID restrictions. So
Cycling, running.
Were you a keen cyclist before you moved to Denmark, or?
So I'm ashamed to say I don't have a road bike here, but I need to get into my cycling. But long distance running used to be my bag, and then I've introduced. My wife and I have now become enthusiastic ice swimmers or cold water swimmers, and it is unusual. It is a brilliantly Nordic pursuit. So part of the routine now is jumping in some very cold water. It's about, I think it's about -4 recently. We have a little swim about for 10-15 minutes and then go and warm up and have a coffee, and you feel pretty good about the world.
Is there anything that you have to do to prepare for that? Do you have to spend 10 minutes, you know, breathing in and out vigorously before you jump in, or?
I think starting in June helps.
I have a friend in Sweden, Daniel Duboski, who has a business called Funded by Me, and he takes great delight on putting Instagram photos of him in his budgie smugglers about to take the dip every morning into -8 and praising the Lord for how good he feels afterwards. I mean, we might be going that way next week in England, because I think there's a real cold spell going in, which the kids are really excited about, having some snow in London potentially on Sunday. So hold that thought, it could happen again, because we had some a couple of weeks ago. And then look, you know, we're always a bit nosy on even more personal things, like we're indoors a lot. What are you watching at the moment? Any good shows to recommend? Because I love a nice dark mysterious Gandhi detective series.
Yeah, what's the Danish Netflix selection like?
Well, that's an interesting one. So I was equally surprised to discover, I assumed that 1, 2, and 3 would be sort of film noir, detective, Scandi, slightly grisly drama. And Inspector Morse features worryingly high in the top 10 Danish. Yeah, so moving swiftly on.
Is that also on your personal list?
May or may not be. It depends how often I clear the history. No, that thankfully not. No, I'm definitely with you on the. I have to say I've cheated a bit. I'm catching up on the Bosch on Amazon Prime, which is sort of the LA, a little bit sort of film noir. So it's sort of gritty. Bosch, yeah, Hieronymus Bosch. Titus Welliver is sort of a slightly gritty LA homicide detective, and it sort of actually has a little bit of a
Bosch. Okay, got you. Yeah.
For that one, but yeah, for sure, can't go wrong with The Bridge. I think there's no complaints on any side of the Sweden-Denmark connection for the Bridge.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, great. Did you miss much about the UK, London? Or England?
I mean, there is a vibrancy, an ecosystem, a network. I mean, let's not forget pubs and curry houses, which are excellent places to, you know, socialise and catch up and exchange assorted.
We miss those. We miss those if we live there.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, funnily enough, you realise what an incredibly, and this is surprising, what an incredibly green city is. The parks of London and the open spaces are phenomenal. But no, it's a very, very different way of living, and I think there is a vibrancy to a sort of 10 million person capital city than a 500,000 one. But of course, there are other qualities and things that make it very, very sort of comfortable and easy living here.
Great. Have a look, Oliver. I want to say thank you for taking the time. And I don't know, Anthony, do you have any last burning questions before we?
Does it actually rain more in Denmark than it does in the UK?
Well, the Danes keep mocking me for how much it rains in the UK. So I think their assumption is it's even more. I would say it's that's a wash between the two countries.
Well, look, on that note, thanks again. Been great catching up, and keep up the good work. And hopefully we'll catch up again with you in 6 months or so and get the update on how things are panning out in 2021. But brilliant to hear from you. Great to find out more about Maersk Growth, and keep well, stay safe, keep away from COVID. Take care.
Keep warm.